Welcome back in. Welcome back in. We are almost through a really brutal week 11. A lot of low scoring, a lot of bad offense, not a lot of fantasy points for some people. So, that being said, we're here to talk about the week 12 waiver wire ads. And there were definitely some injuries this week that we're going to have to talk through. But first, let's start with the quarterbacks, some of our top streaming options of the week. And we are going to start with Jacoby Brissett. We keep talking about him, but we're going to keep talking about him. While the Cardinals got the brakes beat off of them 41-22, Jacoby Brissett came through with more garbage time fantasy goodness. Brissett set an NFL record today by completing 47 of 57 passes for 452 yards and 2 touchdowns. He finished with 24 fantasy points since taking over Kyler Murray. Brissett is averaging 314 passing yards and has now thrown 10 touchdowns over that span. Next up for the Cardinals is another great matchup, this time against a Jaguars pass defense that allows the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Brissett is easily the best streaming option of the week, and he's only rostered in 33% of leagues. Next up is going to be Trevor Lawrence on the other side of that game. Lawrence, the Jaguars, blew the doors off the Chargers today, 35-6. Lawrence and the passing attack didn't have to do a whole lot. He completed 14 of 22 for 153 yards and a score. He also rushed 5 times for 9 yards and another touchdown. While typically the Cardinals are a defense we want to attack through the passing game, they have dealt with a number of injuries, making this defense a lot more vulnerable. So I do think Trevor Lawrence is another option you could look at. Next up is going to be Bryce Young versus the 49ers. Now, Bryce Young went off today against the Falcons. He completed 31 of 45 passes for 448 yards, 3 touchdowns for 32 fantasy points. This was certainly not expected. Now, this does feel a bit chasey considering Young hasn't surpassed 10 fantasy points since week 6. But this is a very good matchup against an injury-ravaged 49ers defense that allows the 8th most fantasy points to quarterback. So I do think you could look to Bryce Young. I don't feel great about it, but here we are. Next up is going to be Davis Mills or CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud missed another week with a concussion. Davis Mills filled in again against the Titans this week. Mills completed 26 of 41 for 274 yards and a touchdown. He also rushed 2 times for 14 yards for 16 fantasy points. Obviously, nothing special. It didn't kill you if you had to play him. It remains to be seen if Stroud will make it back for their quick turnaround against the Bills at home on Thursday Night Football. But either way, you can expect the Texans to throw the ball at a very high rate with Josh Allen coming in. If Stroud does make it back, it should be noted that if he does make it back, Stroud has played significantly better at home than he has on the road. Stroud, through his career, has averaged over 280 passing yards and 2 touchdowns per game at home. So he is a much better quarterback at home. So if he was to play, I do think Stroud is also a decent streaming option, and you should also look at as well. Let's keep moving over to the last one. That's going to be Tyler Shook versus the Falcons in a battle of gross streaming options this week. Tyler Shook throws his name into the mix. Last time we saw him, he was week 10. He completed 19 of 27 for 282 yards and 2 touchdowns for 19 fantasy points. Not a terrible for the rookie. The pluses, I think, for him would be Kellen Moore leans heavily onto the pass. They average 36.7 pass attempts per game, which is top 12. This matchup isn't a bad one against a defense that was just shredded for over 500 total yards against the Panthers. Admittedly, you probably would be pretty desperate to get here, but it's not the worst matchup on the slate. So that being said, we also have 4 teams on bye this week. So there are going to be people out there looking to stream with the Chargers, Broncos, Dolphins, Commanders on bye this week, but it is thin pickings out there for options. Some other guys you could have talked about with like Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers left with an injury today, and I'm not playing Mason Rudolph. So there's just not many great streaming options, I think, on the table this week. But I think Jacoby Brissett, if he's sitting out there, I would be going all in and try to add him because he by far makes the most sense. But let's keep moving here. Let's move over to the running back position where we definitely have some stuff to talk about. And this is where I think the best options you're going to have this week, and probably one of the better streaming option, or not streaming, one of the better waiver wire periods we're going to have, because one, Josh Jacobs left early in the second quarter with a knee injury. Emmanuel Wilson finished the game. He finished with 12 touches, 49 yards, and a touchdown for 14 PPR points today against the Giants. Now, this is something that will be closely monitored with Jacobs. We are waiting for the MRI results to see how much time he will miss. If this is a long-term injury and requires a trip to IR, Wilson would be a top waiver wire ad, and probably you'd look to use most, if not all, of your remaining fab or if you had a top waiver priority, you'd probably look to add it there because Wilson played 95% of the snaps, hit on 100% of the rush attempts with Jacobs off the field. Now, I will say the Packers' upcoming schedule isn't necessarily great for running backs as they play the Vikings, Lions, Bears, and Broncos. Either way, finding an running back of this type of workload is rare. So going all in, I think, is the smart move here for him. So I think Emmanuel Wilson, if Josh Jacobs is going to miss time, and good news is we should find out well before I think the results of that MRI and how long he's going to be out. And I will say the Packers are historically very cautious when it comes to injuries. So if this is any sort of long-term thing, I definitely think he's going to require a trip to the IR. But that remains to be seen. Let's wait and see what the MRI says. But if he is out, especially put on IR, Emmanuel Wilson is easily the top waiver out of the week. Let's move over to Sean Tucker, rostered in 26% of leagues. Now, Sean Tucker had himself a monster day against the Bills. He rushed 19 times for 106 yards and 2 scores. He also caught both of his targets for 34 yards and another touchdown for 34 PPR points. Now, I go back and forth on where to have him because it does sound like Bucky Irvin could return next week after returning to practice this past week and getting in limited practices. Tucker finished with 9 more carries than Rachaad White. It's possible that Tucker could emerge as the 1B to Bucky Irving 1A if he's able to return this week. And especially with how well he's played the last few weeks. If Bucky doesn't make it back, though, Tucker would be an RB2 against a tough Rams defense. I think I wouldn't go crazy using a bunch of fab here or a top waiver priority, but I do think he very well could have earned himself a role, a much bigger role going forward, especially with Bucky Irving coming off this injury. I doubt you see Bucky Irving come in and just handle this monster workload. So I think Sean Tucker does make some sense. But let's move over to Kenneth Gainwell, rostered in 33% of leagues. Jalen Warren left with an ankle injury. Kenneth Gainwell finished with 9 carries for 24 yards, but he was tired. Really, where he made his bank was he was targeted 8 times. He hauled in 7 of them for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns for 29 PPR points. This is another situation to monitor this week. If Warren were to miss, Gainwell would be a strong RB2 play against a Bears defense that allows the 14th most PPR points to running backs. It's worth noting that Warren said after the game that they were just being cautious and that he thought he'd be okay. We'll see on that. I think Gainwell is worthy of an ad either way, as he's been heavily involved in the passing game. He actually ranks top 6 among all running backs and targets this season. So I think in PPR formats, either way, Kenneth Gainwell is worth an ad. Let's keep moving. Let's move over to some of the handcuff type plays. First is going to be Blake Corum. Bye weeks are winding down, and fantasy playoffs are only 3 weeks away. Now it's time to start stashing handcuff backs. Blake Corum is averaging 11.5 carries per game, but doesn't get much of the goal line work. He offers some standalone value, but would be a top 12 running back moving forward if something were to happen to Kyren Williams. So I do think Blake Corum is one of the top handcuffs to own right now. Next up is going to be Bashal Tutin. Now, I thought we were going to be talking about him as a must-add this week. He looks really good, rushing 15 times for 74 yards and a score for 13 fantasy points against the Chargers. But he ended up getting hurt in that game. He got rolled up on and left the game. It looks like it's a possible high ankle sprain, which would make him unlikely to play next week against the Cardinals. LaQuint Allen would be the one who would be the next man up, but probably doesn't offer much appeal. If this injury isn't serious, can make it back this week, I do think Tutin is a very good ad. It is sad because I thought he looked really, really good today, and it looked like he was finally breaking out, something we've been waiting for, and then he gets hurt. So just a shame for him, but he's still, I think, worthy of an ad in 12-team leagues. Next up is going to be Chris Rodriguez. Rodriguez has officially taken over as the lead back. This backfield, the JCM experiment was fun, but it appears it might be over. Rodriguez rushed 15 times for 79 yards. He also hauled in his lone target against the Dolphins. JCM did end up with 9 carries, but he only managed 28 yards. JCM has been off for the last 5 weeks, averaging just a 2.9 yards per carry, and it seems unlikely he earns a larger role at this point. I think Rodriguez makes for an interesting flex play moving forward, but they do go on by essentially. Also, I did want to note that Trey Benson is expected back next week for the Cardinals. That was per Jonathan Gannon after their loss to the 49ers. So if Trey Benson were sitting out there, he's definitely an ad, but he's rostered, I think, 60% of leagues. But either way, it is good to see. It looks like Trey Benson will be back next week. Speaking of the Cardinals, move over to some wide receivers because we definitely have stuff to talk about. First is going to be Michael Wilson, rostered just 15% of leagues. He's only started in 7% of ESPN leagues, and if he did, good for you because Michael Wilson had a monster day today against the 49ers. He was targeted a whopping 18 times He turned that into 15 receptions for 185 yards and 33 PPR points. He's right now currently the wide receiver one on the week. This is not a performance I saw coming. I knew the matchup was there and in play as a flex option, but no shot that I think that he was going to have anywhere close to this kind of target share. So, also, Greg Dortch, somebody I want to talk about, only rostered in 3% of leagues. Dortch also had a solid day today, but nothing close to that as he secured all 6 of his targets for 66 yards and a score for 18 PPR points. Now, I think both Cardinals pass catchers should be viewed as a viable flex options this week if Marvin Harrison were forced to miss another week after being treated for appendicitis. If Marv misses, Wilson would be a high-end, probably wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2, and I think Dortch would also be in line as a flex option. Though if Marv returns, I think Michael Wilson is at least worth a roster spot in 12-team leagues, but Greg Dortch is not somebody I would add if Marvin Harrison were to return this next week against the Jags. So let's keep moving. Let's move over to Christian Watson. Watson had his best day of the season, catching 4 or 5 targets for 46 yards and 2 touchdowns for 20 PPR points. At this point, it's hard to ignore how good Christian Watson has looked, and he looks like the Packers' best wide receiver as he has now racked up 40 or more receiving yards in all 4 games that he's played. I think he makes for a viable flex option. Also, if Jacobs is forced to miss significant time, I think you could see the Packers shift to more of a pass-heavy approach, which should lift all boats for these pass catchers. That's really been one of the biggest problems for the Packers. They still throw the ball at a very high rate, and they really lead on the run. But I think if Jacobs were to miss any sort of significant time, I think you have to imagine they lean more on Jordan Love and some of their pass catchers here. Now, I will say, the next 4 games, like I already kind of mentioned, but the Packers will take on the Vikings. Not a bad matchup. Lions is a good matchup. Bears is a good matchup for the pass catchers, but the Broncos obviously not great, depending on how much time Josh Jacobs will miss. But either way, 3 of the 4 of those top matchups are top matchups for wide receivers. I think Watson should be rostered in all leagues moving forward at this point. Next time I want to talk about is Alec Pierce. I wasn't expecting to even talk about him, but for whatever reason, he is available, and I think we should remedy that. Yahoo shows he's only rostered in 44% of leagues, and ESPN shows 46% of leagues. Prior to the Week 11 bye, Pierce had posted 18.4, 17.5, 8.9, and 14.8 PPR points over the last month. Pierce, I think, is going to be a low-end wide receiver 3 this week against the Chiefs on the road, but there's no reason Alec Pierce should be rostered anywhere close or to this. I mean, he's available in over 50% of Yahoo and ESPN leagues. That needs to change. Lastly, let's talk about Darnell Mooney now. I really didn't want to do this, but I feel like we have to. The Falcons didn't just lose the game versus the Panthers today. They also lost Drake London to a knee injury and Michael Penix to a bone bruise. London's injury doesn't sound serious, but at this point, I will have to wait and see for more info coming tomorrow. If London is out next week, Mooney would be the wide receiver 1. He can offer some flex appeal, though he has been targeted 15 times the last 2 weeks, and he hasn't topped more than 6 PPR points. So I think it's pretty tough to trust him. But if you're desperate and needing a flex play, I think you could at least look at Darnell Mooney against the Saints. If you move here, let's talk about some of the more deeper leagues, probably 12-team deep benches and above. First is going to be Jalen Coker. Now, Coker didn't do anything overly impressive today, catching all 4 passes for 52 yards. However, Xavier Legette left with a hip injury. Legette had himself a really good day, catching 4 of 8 targets for 83 yards and a touchdown for 18 PPR points. If Legette were to miss, Coker would be in line as a flex option against the 49ers defense that allows the 7th most PPR points to wide receiver. Now, if Legette is able to play this week, I do think that he becomes a viable add as well. He has had some weeks this year where he has been usable, and this is a pretty solid matchup against the 49ers. Next up, let's move over to Pat Bryant. I probably would have him higher if 1, the Broncos weren't going on bye, and 2, if it wasn't the Broncos. Broncos spread the ball around so much that it makes it hard to trust any of the pass catchers. Either way, Bryant had his best game of the season, catching 5 or 6 targets for 82 yards against the Chiefs. Now, there was a lot of hype surrounding Pat Bryant during the preseason. I mean, Sean Payton was out there comparing him to slant boy Michael Thomas, but we really hadn't seen much from him outside of the Week 8 game where he caught 2 passes for 40 yards and a score. While the Broncos are going on bye, we could see a rookie bump for Bryant down the stretch. He's worthy of an add in 12-team leagues if you have the bench space. Lastly, I just have to mention it, Tyrell Shavers, rostered only 1% of leagues. I really don't know what to make of this. Shavers was the Bills' leading receiver today, catching 4 or 5 targets for 90 yards and a score for 19 PPR points. He only ran 15 to 34 routes, and that was with Keon Coleman as a healthy scratch and Dalton Kincaid out. This feels more like a one-off performance than anything sticky. I think this is much more of a like super deep league, like 16 team type of ad than anything. Let's move over to the tight end position, and we're going to start with Juwan Johnson. Again, kind of surprised here that he's still only rostered in 45% of leagues. Johnson posted his best game of the season in Week 10 prior to their Week 11 bye. He caught four passes for 92 yards and a score for 19 PPR points. He's now scored 10 or more PPR points in 3 of the last 4 games. With Rashid Shaheed gone, Juwan Johnson will see plenty of targets and should be a weekly tight end one moving forward. So he's the top of my list here. Next up is going to be Dalton Schultz. Again, only rostered in 49% of leagues. Schultz had another productive day. He was targeted 9 times, and he turned that into 6 catches for 51 yards against the Titans. He's now been targeted 41 times the last 5 weeks and 28 times over just the last 3 weeks. Schultz will once again be near the top of the board and top streaming options, rostered in less than 50% of leagues. Next up, let's move over to Brenton Strange, only rostered in 12% of leagues. Strange returned to practice this past week, but he did not end up playing. He's now missed the last 5 weeks, but he has a pretty solid chance of returning this week against the Cardinals. Prior to his injury, he was seeing roughly 6 targets per game and running 70% of the routes. Strange is a top tight end that is widely available this week against a Cardinals defense that allows the 12th most PPR points tight end. So I think Strange is the one that's probably a bit much more widely available in most leagues, especially 12-team leagues. So I do think Strange does make some sense if you're looking to stream this week, especially if you're somebody that has like Aronde Gatson, who is going to be on bye this week. Lastly, I just want to hit on is AJ Barner, roster 9% of leagues. Barner had a huge day today. He was targeted 11 times. He turned that into 10 receptions for 70 yards. This is the first time all year they've received more than 7 targets in a game. He also ran 40 of 49 routes and received a really strong 27% target share. Most of the season, it's been more of a committee approach with rookie Elijah Arroyo mixing in, but Arroyo only ran 16 routes today. It is a sign of things to come. Barner could be a very useful option moving forward. And next up is a matchup against the Titans, where I don't foresee the Seahawks having to throw a lot in that game. But either way, I think Barner is at least worth a look, especially in leagues where most people are starved for tight ends. So Ty Johnson, I don't think he's really somebody that I think in PPR formats only, I guess I could have had him on there, but I still think this is much more of a very much a game script type approach when it comes to Ty Johnson. I don't think he's somebody that you're ever really going to know when to play him, when to start him. And so that's my issue with him. And even if something were to happen to the starter, James Cook, I definitely think it'd be Ray Davis would be the one that would step into that role, into the James Cook role. I don't think Ty Johnson's role would really change. And so that's why I don't really have him as high or really on here. I think it's somebody that we definitely need to try to go out and add. Thoughts on Josh Jacobs' injury? Likelihood he returns by week 14 or 15. I don't know. We'll see. He left that game, didn't return. He definitely was a knee injury. We'll have to see. There's some concern with a PCL. If it's a PCL sprain that he has, think why is his name escaping me? Ricky Pearsall for the 49ers, who missed 6 weeks with a PCL strain. And it could definitely be an issue here. This could be a multi-week type injury for him or something where he's placed on IR. And like I said, the Packers are very, very cautious when it comes to injuries. They are not a team that tends to rush players back from any sort of injuries. So I would be surprised at this point if Josh Jacobs played this upcoming week. But we'll see what happens after that. But and again, really looking forward to seeing what the MRI results are. Because if he's out long term, then like I said, I think Emmanuel Wilson is easily the top waiver ad this week, and it's not even close. And you're probably looking to go all in, depending on your roster. Now, if your team is pretty low, you don't really need running backs, and maybe that's not a move you make. But if you're desperate for a running back, I think you definitely have to, especially if you're a Josh Jacobs owner. I definitely think that's something you need to do. But that's also why I've been saying for the last week or two that we really need to be focused on starting to add and stash some of these running backs that are just widely sitting out there. Yes, something may never happen with them, but it's like Tyler Algier, who is still rostered in less than 50% of leagues, or a Blake Corum. Guys like that, we know their role. If something were to happen and they were to get hurt, and the running back goes down in front of them, those guys are going to become league winners. And so, those are the players that I want on my roster now. I mean, we're pretty much almost through bye weeks. We have this week where, I mean, really only 2 of the 4 I think are really huge. I mean, obviously, I think there's like, Jalen Wall, Devon Achane, and the Commanders, I guess Debo Samuel to some extent. But and then after this week, there's no bye weeks in week 13 because of Thanksgiving. And then you have the last week, which is week 14. And I don't even think on that. So on that week, you have the Panthers, Giants, 49ers, and Patriots. And that's about it. And so I think now is the time to really start investing in your bench and really trying to build up, especially if you're looking like a lock for the playoffs. That's what I'm going to be trying to do is add as many guys as I can just in case something like this happens. So that being said, appreciate everybody checking it out. We'll be back again on Tuesday with our top defense and kickers. Then we'll be back in like our normal routine Wednesday with all that. We will probably have a condensed week on the following week because it's Thanksgiving. We have some other stuff going on, so we'll see how that plays out. But I'll try to get most of the content out probably early that week, especially with 3 games and then the Friday game on Black Friday. So, but that's for next week. Anyways, I appreciate everybody checking it out. If you have any questions, leave in the comment section below. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.